Happy Tuesday. Today's April 22nd. This is the Ways and Means Committee, and nice to see you all. I hope you had good weekends for the sunshine. And we are going to spend our afternoon on H483 with staff. And then tomorrow we are going to hear from a whole lot of stakeholders regarding H483. And then something will happen with all of that, and we'll finish out the week talking about TIF in preparation for a modification of TIF that's going to come to us from House Commerce probably the following week. We are nearing the end of the session to some degree, and pretty much everything we've done is likely going to wind up in committee of conference. So that's really fun. If anyone gets any updates from the Senate for any bills, that please be attentive to any bills that you reported and their journey back from the Senate. Because sometimes we don't get entirely looped into those things and we need to be tracking them. For instance, the marriage license fee has reappeared in like 5 bills since the budget adjustment was vetoed. So those are things that's good for us to keep an eye on. So just let me know if something comes back that we need to be hearing about. So we have received S51 from the Senate. It is a unpaid caregiver tax credit. We took a little bit of testimony on that, maybe even a lot. We took some testimony on that. I don't need to add modifiers. And we still have H483, our tax credit bill on our wall. Likely those 2 bills are going to make better friends with each other and then leave this room again. And so wanted to have a refresh on H483 because that's the content that we are working with here. And tomorrow we'll hear the amendment from Representative Lipsky on that with the military pension retirement expansion. But just wanted to sort of prep for all of that with staff because what happened a month ago feels like a very distant memory to me, and I don't know if it feels like a distant memory to you. So I'm being like more vague than I need to be. H483, it's an H bill. It did not leave before crossover. So if we want that language to get over to the Senate, we need to put it on an S bill. S51 is an income tax credit. So those are all the things we're going to put together this session, maybe this week, ideally, if we get our work done. So with that, I will stop talking. Kirby, can you come sit here and tell us about H483? Thank you. Which is the expansion of existing income tax credit.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kirby Keaton, Legislative Counsel. Chair mentioned we reviewed H483 a while back. So here's our refresher. It's a committee bill that does 3 things. It expands the eligibility requirement for the Vermont Child Tax Credit to allow the credit for children 6 years of age or older. That's increasing it by 1 year over current law. And I believe that was in H135, which is one of the, which was from the Department of Taxes, I believe. Looking at Representative Canfield, the sponsor, to help verify that. Second thing this does is expand the earned income tax credit for individuals without qualifying children to 100% of the federal credit. We discussed before that at the federal level, the amount of credit for people without children is a lot lower. And so increasing that to 100% for Vermont evens that up a little bit, but still does not reach the amount of credit available for people with children. Another one that was in H135. And third, increase the income thresholds used to determine eligibility for the partial exemption of Social Security benefits and retirement income. So getting into the language, page 2, you have 5 changed to 6 for the child tax credit we talked about. There's also some clarifying language in here that says that, so at the federal level, this credit is not refundable. So there's some federal rules around eligibility relating to that. And this is not something Vermont currently does, but my understanding there was concern that Vermont could, without this language, try to apply those federal rules about eligibility to Vermont inappropriately. So this is just some direct language to prevent that from ever happening. But this is essentially solving a problem that does not exist at the moment. In section 3, we have the earned income tax credit, like we just talked about. The big changes there around lines 10 and 11, making the credit for an individual who does not claim one or more children 100% of the federal credit. The other strike-through language you see here relates to allowing taxpayers who do not have a federal tax number, tax identification number, to claim this. It was written in 2 places within the same section, so that was just crossed out and it was moved to the bottom. So no change in substance of the law there. And then in section 4, we have those partial exclusions that exist in current law, and we have a bump in the threshold amounts for the Social Security partial exemption of 5,000 in each place. So the phase out would be with AGI between 55,000 and 65,000 instead of current law, which is 50 and 60 for single filers. And then those who are whose filing status is married, the thresholds go from 65 to 70 on the low end, and then the phase out stops at 80,000 now, up 5,000. That's for the Social Security exemption, which, as a refresher, if you were under the threshold, if you're under, so under this language, let's say you're married, say you're married, if your return has an AGI of less than 70,000 for Social Security, you could exclude all of that Social Security income, and then it starts to phase out between 70 and 80,000, which is different than the other partial exemptions, which we're about to get to, such as civil service retirement. That's, the federal employee retirement system. For this exemption, it's the first 10,000 of income received instead of all of it. If you're under that low end threshold, which is being changed from 50,000 to 55,000 here. And then the phase out is 55 to 65 for single. And then for married, it's being changed from 65 to 70 on the low end. And then the phase out is between 70,000 and 80,000.
Ask a ridiculously stupid question. With this federal income, would that also, are military retired pensions considered federal income? So, I know how this works. I know how this works.
Right.
Coming back from the dark.
It's not a stupid question.
The
I know, I get it, I get it.
the statute is
I get it.
written, or it's put together in a way that can be confusing, because the civil service retirement system process is the same as military and
Yes.
retirement income.
That's my point.
And it's also the same as, we don't have the language here because those sections aren't being changed, but there's sections below it that say, sub C says other contributory systems, which is a system like the old federal retirement system was one in which people did not pay into Social Security. So that was a contributory system. So systems like that could also use this civil service retirement stuff, and U.S. military retirement can use it as well.
But it's either or.
And you have to
Yeah.
pick one.
Okay.
And those are the basically subsection C, D, and E is what we just said there, and that's what's missing from this language.
It's written broadly to accommodate any form of federal payment, but you have to pick a one.
Yes, if you have multiple, you have to pick one, including the social security options.
Okay.
And again, the other systems, you can only exclude up to 10,000. Social security, if you're under the threshold, you exclude all of it. And that's all. And it would apply to this, all of these changes would apply to tax filings next year. And so for this current 2025 tax year.
While you're sitting there, and not seeing any other questions for anyone, can you explain a little bit, sort of again, I'm just getting more questions from the wider world about the link up and looming federal changes to tax law. And so can you just explain our link up one more time? Because it's been a while since we last discussed it.
Well, the link up.
Separate from this bill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we talked about before how parts of the Vermont tax code, but when it comes to federal link up, the income taxes, Vermont has decoupled in some places where we don't rely on everything that flows through federally. But Vermont still starts at AGI when defining, I don't think we have it in this bill, the language, but like the definition of taxable income, for instance, starts with federal AGI and then has things that adjustments. Some things that are included in federal AGI, Vermont does not include, excludes those, such as these partial exclusions actually that we're talking about in section 4 of this. This is something that Vermont is taxed at the federal level and Vermont excludes, chooses to take back out of that. And then there's other things that are excluded at the federal level that Vermont decides to add back in. So with the link up, the things that do flow through and that Vermont does not change or adjust would also flow through. So for instance, you name it, any change to income taxes. One thing that's been in the news is like tax exempt status for an organization. That flows through to Vermont. And if at the federal level, the law changed or just interpretations of the law changed so that many organizations are all of a sudden not tax exempt anymore without any changes to Vermont's law. Because of the link up and because of that flowing through, those organizations could potentially start having to file an income tax return and they would lose other benefits such as in meals and rooms tax, there's an exemption for 501c3s. There's in land gains tax, 501c3s are involved. So it could affect other taxes besides income tax as well.
And the Senate's looking at language today to make sure that we're sort of stay consistent with the current definition of tax exempt status, not possible future definitions of tax exempt status under federal law. For our link up, can you talk a little bit about how it's sort of like linked up to a single year, not linked up forever more?
Yeah, so the way that Vermont law has the link up written is it references a specific federal tax year to link up to. And that's why every year the General Assembly actively changes that to link back up again. Doesn't have to be that way, but that's the way that Vermont's always done it, is that you make the conscious decision every year to link up or not, instead of having something that would just be a rolling link up, for instance. And in that case, the action would be if you ever decide to decouple, that's when the General Assembly would take action. Not what Vermont does. What Vermont does is actively, consciously decide every year whether to link up to the current federal tax code for income tax.
And so if there are federal tax code changes that would affect Vermont state taxpayers, those would not apply to sort of would those apply to this year? And so would we have time to take action?
If they were done retroactively, it's possible that you would not have a chance before next session to make changes. And with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, there were parts of it that were retroactive.
For instance, if the federal government decided not to tax tipped wages or overtime and made it retroactive January 1st,
2025,
be significant.
depending on how it's written, it could flow through government, yes.
And then if we met in January, could we make the decoupling retroactive?
Yes.
But people would have to think about that.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Including lead counsel, who, you know, I would want to also look more closely at that. And the details are going to matter in those things. So it's hard to tell you hypothetical future federal action and what would happen because.
Thanks. No, sorry. Yeah.
I do have a question. I think, Kirby, we may have discussed this about with the civil service retirement system, which has really kind of been mothballed in the sense of no new employees of the federal government are entering that, and instead they're going to the federal employee retirement system, which is a different system. It's still a contributory system that they're contributing to, but it was up in the 80s.
Yeah, my understanding is the one from the 80s is the contributory system that is one thing that would be referenced by our subsection C, other contributory systems.
Okay.
In our partial exemption, and that the current system is the civil service retirement. And as far as I know, I think that that's still ongoing.
Yeah, it's just it's not taking, as far as I know, and you may know better, but I don't think it's taking on any new employees or any new beneficiaries at this point.
I'm
Happy to be proven wrong. I'm just wondering if.
yeah, I would want to look into that. I have not, and Pat might be able to, help us with that.
I think Pat's gonna sit in the chair in a minute, so we can wait till then for him to help us. That's okay with him. Cool. Any other questions for Kirby about this?
Thank you.
Yes,
This is how we passed out of this committee at one time.
indeed,
Same language.
yes. But you're welcome to ask about hypothetical changes to it if you are interested.
No, but
Okay.
when S 51 goes over, leaves here, and it might have the military retirement,
Mhm.
then this language, that language would be stricken here.
And just to update you about goings on around the building, there's the workforce development bill in Senate Economic Development right now that has the complete exemption for military retirement. in case you Didn't know.
Same thing. So if that passes, this language doesn't come for the military. It's not necessary.
We'll want to do some conforming, because that language actually deletes some of the changes here. If they were to both pass, yeah.
Would this be a time to ask about what military retirement pay, which individuals get it versus which individuals might think they're getting it, but they wouldn't be getting it?
I think that's a good question for Pat. Okay, thank you very much, Kirby. Would you like to join us? Thank you so much. Sorry, I missed that ceremonial moment sometimes.
To do anything I'm not told to do.
I appreciate that.
So Patrick Titterton, Joint Fiscal Office. On the committee's website, there are 3 documents under my name. And I think what I was I'm not envisioning doing all the materials. Some of it's hopefully reference and reminders for the committee. It's all stuff you've seen before, so there shouldn't be any surprises.
I think sometimes there's only so much we can hold in our heads, and so things we might have seen before become surprises.
Always like to keep you on your toes then.
Thank you.
So yeah, so the first thing I have up here is the fiscal note for the bill as you passed out. Um, as Kirby was walking you through, there's three changes that are being made. One is increasing the age eligibility for children for the child tax credit from 5 to 6 years old. It leaves the income bands completely untouched and the size of the credit untouched. But that, change of the eligible age, as you can see here, we're estimating that to be $4.5 million in foregone revenue annually going forward. And actually, I could just take a quick step back. All the estimates that are in this fiscal note actually are consensus figures with the administration. So we worked with the tax department to go through and get to numbers everyone could agree on for these. The other one is for the EITC. Those claimants who don't have kids have really, really low maximum credit amounts. And I've got a table a little later on to highlight that. But it's increasing the amount of the federal credit that they can receive from 38 current law to 100%, and it leaves those claimants with kids untouched. That change alone, estimated to be about $3 million in foregone revenue annually. And then the third and final change is those income thresholds that apply to the Social Security exemption, CSRS, and sort of in a backdoor way in statute, also the military retirement pay. And just because we were just talking about it, so CSRS was the old civil service employee pension system. And under that construct, those people were not paying into Social Security. I think they ended taking in new employees in like 86. And then replaced that with FERS, FERS, which is the new one. But those employees are paying into Social Security now. So sort of the distinction here is like the contributory system is referencing ones like the CSRS where those individuals are not paying into Social Security. So, it's possible that someone works in the federal government long, like prior to, when they could still be admitted into CSRS, they were working in the government long enough to qualify for pension benefits, but maybe they had a career change and got a job where they were contributing. So they're sort of they can be sort of a scenario where they can receive CSRS income and Social Security. But if they spent their whole career in CSRS, they wouldn't be collecting any Social Security because they never qualified for it. And so, yeah, that last change there is just increasing the threshold by $5,000 each for each filing status. And that change would be $2.1 million annually. I think I noted for you all, just because of Vermont's demographics, and this is a retirement targeted tax exemption. This is one that has potential to increase in cost over time as Vermont continues to age and more people have this type of income. But put together, all three of those proposed changes would be a touch under $10 million annually in foregone revenue. 9.6 to be more precise. So those are the sort of the top line figures, just to give you a little sense of current law and scope. So talking about the child tax credit, and last year there were about 21,000 tax returns that claimed this credit. And they received about $24 million from that credit in total. And so by this age eligibility change, additional cost of $4.5 million annually, that would bump the total value of this credit to somewhere in the range of $28.5 billion. And conversely to what I was just talking about with the retirement population, Vermont has increasingly fewer kids, has been the trend line. So if that trend were to continue, its potential, because the income thresholds don't change and the size of the credit doesn't change without legislative action, untouched, it could potentially decrease in cost over time. Yeah, so with that change, estimated to be about $28.5 million in total value from that credit going to Vermonters. When talking about the earned income tax credit, this table here, I just wanted to highlight the differences in the maximum credit amounts these claimants are eligible for. You can see that I have one column here for current federal law, existing Vermont law, and then how that would look if we bump those zero dependent eligible claimants from 38% to 100%. Still significantly below what a claimant with just one dependent would be able to receive. And sort of something not shown here, which we've walked through, is the income thresholds for the single people without dependents are much more stringent than any filer who does have dependents. So again, last year, about 33,000 Vermont tax filers claimed the EITC. They received about $26.9 million in value from the credit, either by eliminating their tax liability or actually going out to them in the form of a check, like a hard cash refund. So $26.9 million last year. This increase is about $3 million annually. Total value would be about $30 million annually for this credit. So it still is just would still just be eking out the child tax credit in terms of the most valuable personal income tax credit that the state provides to taxpayers annually.
Do you think more people are going to file for the more single people are going to file for the EITC when the percentage goes?
I would hope so. I mean, it's possible that some of those real lower income folks who aren't required to file their taxes because they don't make enough, it's possible that they might opt to then go and file. I don't know if it would necessarily be enough for me to really move the needle on the estimate a whole lot, but there certainly could be some cases like that.
But you didn't include it in your estimates. Okay.
Is this the one that goes away when they're 65?
Yeah, so the age eligibility for this credit is between the ages of 25 and 65. 25 because, there are some younger folks who can't be claimed as dependents by their parents anymore, but they could still be, living at home, washing dishes in the summer, going to school, and technically be eligible. But unless they're 25, they're not eligible for this. And then conversely, once they hit retirement age, 65, they're not eligible again. Part of the thinking on that has to do with, so the EITC has been it's a very successful program federally in taking people sort of out of poverty levels, so getting them above that poverty line. And conversely, Social Security has been really effective in getting American senior citizens out of that poverty line. So in a sense, once you reach that age, you're kind of handing off that support from one program to another, if that makes sense. And yeah, this last piece here is about the social.
Just run numbers about what it would cost if we went over 65. I know it'd be hard for the tax department, but
I haven't seen numbers for that. You were just talking with Kirby a little bit about the link up stuff, because we're just a flat percentage of the feds. Changing any of the eligibility rules would require decoupling. And I mean, you could steal a lot of their ideas when doing so. But that would just need to be a sort of new sort of section you'd have to put into statute. But I haven't explored that in depth. Social Security, military retirement, and CSRS. So what the bill proposed to do is increase the AGI threshold that determines eligibility for this exemption from 55, so 50,000 or below to stop. Okay, so from $50,000 to $55,000 if you're single, and then from $65,000 to $70,000, you'd be eligible for the full 100% of this income being of Social Security, of that income being exemption eligible. There is a $10,000 AGI range where it phases out. So there's still plenty of people who get those partial exemptions based on how much they're making, but the full amount is below those thresholds I just mentioned. And like you were discussing with Kirby, the CSRS income and military retirement income are both subject to those same income thresholds. So while the military retirement piece is not sort of explicitly in the bill language that Kirby was sharing with you, because of the way the statute's written, it ties back in. So any change you do here would increase the threshold for that type of income. And of note, which Kirby, I'll just reiterate something Kirby said, if you are eligible and opt to do the exemption for CSRS or military income, retirement income, you can only exempt up to $10,000 of that. And each year when you go through filing your taxes, what the exercise people would do is they say, what was my Social Security? What was my military retirement income? If I choose one or the other, which one gives me a bigger tax break? So they would do that math each year. You don't pick one and then get locked in for life. So you can, do that sort of calculus each year when you're doing your tax return and make that determination year to year.
So about this part of the military retirement, this goes to guys who have, or women who have served at least 20 years and get the official military retirement, right? These aren't people who served 4 years or 6 years and then got out. These are people who made a career out of it, correct? They have long-term service and an established retirement. So I'm thinking, in fact, I know there are a lot of people out there who are believing that all retired or people who no longer are serving would get some kind of an income tax exemption, but that's not true. I want you to say, yes, Carolyn, you're right, or no, Carolyn, you're not right.
Well, I mean, to the extent that they qualify based on income, are you specifically just talking about the military exemption?
Just the military.
And as it's written in the bill that passed this committee, right?
Yes, the bill.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure you were talking about the
And I
full
appreciate
exemption.
that. Yeah, I want to talk the same language here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as long as they're income eligible, and they receive this income, they're
This
fully-
retirement income, this special
the pension,
retirement check.
the retirement pension income. There is something already on the books in another realm, for, exemption on military pay. So if you're at sort of active duty, I don't have the statute up in front of me right now, but, there are for sort of your salaried wages, that you would receive. There's some tax breaks available, but we're first just talking about the military pension retirement income. As long as you're income eligible, you can take it, and you receive that income, you can take it. The equation you want to do for yourself basically is, do I get a bigger tax break from deducting or exempting $10,000 of my military retirement income,
Mhm.
or from however much of my Social Security income? So that's just the decision that the taxpayer has to make.
What I hear Representative Brannigan asking about is whether we're talking about veterans or whether we're talking about military retirees. And I wonder if when we're done with this fiscal note, if we could pull up your memo towards that.
Sure.
Okay. Does that work for you, Representative Brannigan?
Yes, thank you very much. I think that.
And I have some more context I can
Okay,
share.
great, thanks.
So yeah, under current law, I'll just mention about a hair under 30,000 Vermonters claim one of these three exemptions each year. And they, this is in the tax expenditure report, actually. We estimate that they save about $8.2 million on their personal income taxes each year through these exemptions. This $5,000 increase in those thresholds, and this includes all three of those retirement incomes commingled, $2.1 million annually. So if you put that together, it'd be a hair over $10 million annually. That, this tax expenditure total cost would be. So for good, fine there. I have a little more, hopefully to answer, provide a little more context. This is a memo from all the way back in beginning of or end of January. But just to give you a little sense of who we're talking about when we talk about military retirees, a veteran refers to any person or any person who served any length of time in any military service branch. They may have served in combat or been medically discharged, what have you. But generally, a veteran can be basically anyone who's finished basic training, whereas a retired,
Honorably,
presumably.
Yes.
yes.
And then a retiree, to your question, you have to, traditionally, you had to have served 20 years. I know that I heard in some testimony this morning, they have, as of 2017, a little bit more of a blended system for people who don't quite make it to 20, kind of operates like a 401k that you can contribute into. But when talking about military retiree pension income, it's 20 years. Most of these individuals retire between the ages of 40, 50. So with a good amount of, sort of what we consider prime working age years. So they'll likely have other income if they go and get another job. But what's important about that is if you retire as an active duty soldier, you can start receiving this pension income immediately. If you retire as a reservist, you have to wait to the age of 60 to start receiving these benefits. So there is, even within whether you're a retiree or not, there's a little nuance about who's collecting. But yeah, you can't serve 6 years and qualify for this type of income generally. It's really those careerists who've been there 20 plus years who are eligible to receive this.
And so someone could go serve in multiple war zones and still not be a military retiree.
If they don't hit the mark, I think there might be some caveats for, if you're injured or disabled or something like that, but I don't have that directly with me right now. Yeah.
I kind of need that information because I'm getting letters from people who say, my father served, he is disabled now, and he really needs this exemption. And I need to be able to answer, this is how it works.
Am I correct when I was looking at the agenda that you have the VA benefits folks
You do
coming in
indeed.
tomorrow?
Those folks coming tomorrow.
So that's well timed because that's who I would go talk to to dig into your question. They'll certainly have a lot of expertise on that.
And that's what I was trying to say a few minutes ago is I think out there in Vermont, there are a lot of people who have these confused. And they're thinking that because my father served and maybe he's disabled, maybe he's not, he still needs this exemption. Well, that's not what this law would do. It's only the guys who put in 20 years, given the exemption that you were talking about, right?
Yeah.
The thing. And so the boy who gets out of the military at 40 and has put in 20 years, he gets it. But these veterans who, just served 6 years or so, they don't get it. I think that's something that we as legislators need to start making sure our constituents really understand that. If they don't, there's going to be a lot of confusion out there.
I am nervous that we're gonna pass a benefit that people will think that they're gonna get and then they won't
Yes,
get it. I also want to make sure that we honor all the women who serve in our language when we talk about this. I know you keep on going back and forth, so I just wanna say that out loud because it's my job.
I know.
Yeah.
And it's my job too, and I am trying, my big thing here is the whole concept of who's gonna get the benefit and who is not gonna get the benefit. So the concept is anyone served 20 years or whatever the list, whatever the limit is in their particular situation, and they qualify for that retirement and are getting it. Those are the people that if we were to pass this into law would get the exemption, then end with it.
Yeah, and around how many Vermonters is that?
Yeah, so it's a really important distinction, just to give you a sense of the scale of the difference. As of the most recent census information we have available, there's about 34,000 veterans in Vermont, according to the Department of Defense, the people who administer the retirement program. there are about 3,900 retirees. So 34,000 versus 3,900 is sort of the gulf between the definitions of the two groups of people we're talking about. So it is a significant difference in the number of people to get to your point.
Mhm. So I had one more question. The people who have chosen that military retirement exemption portion versus social security, does that mean their benefit is already paid for? And we wouldn't have to include that in the fiscal note of loss of
Oh, I see.
revenue?
No, so for a full exemption and for the partial one we were just looking at, we do need to include any change because one of the things that a full exemption does is it takes off the table the requirement to choose, which I think is what you're getting at here, right? So you would need to include that because any additional sort of claiming of these exemptions is sort of compounded by the fact that they also don't need to choose anymore. So even if you just removed all of the language about having to choose and left the thresholds the same, there would be an increase in cost from this because they would be able to then go and deduct both types of income. If that makes sense.
And so if someone was choosing the military retirement tax reduction under current law and we changed it, then we would have to account for the cost of the social security exemption.
And all the numbers that I've shared with you do sort of take that into account.
Do you have a sense of the average income of veterans versus military retirees?
Well, we have a good sense about, so there's kind of two pieces here. We have a decent sense of what veteran income looks like. And we have a decent sense of what retiree retirement income looks like. What we don't have a good sense of is sort of total retiree household income, because that's not something that's sort of tracked at the federal, state, or any other level that I'm aware of. But generally speaking, retiree household, say they're 45, they were active duty, so they get pension right away. Have some tables here. Let's say that they were a officer and they're getting $42,000 in military retirement income while working a job. Right there, I'd immediately see that this is going to be a much higher income household than your average veteran home. Because nationally, veterans' household income is sort of a bit lower than the general population.
What is it?
Representative Filkins?
How do you track veterans' income?
The U.S. Census Bureau, includes that in many of their surveys. So that is their surveys, it's estimates, but it gives sort of it gives a window into what it might look like.
So did you tell us you said it's less than the general household income is the average income of veterans? What is that? What's the average household income? Or you mean nationally or in Vermont?
Nationally.
Okay.
I'd have to pull those would be easy for me to find for you, but I'd have to, stop sharing my screen and take a few moments to pull the figures. But I'm happy to send those to you this afternoon.
To everybody.
Yeah, to everyone. I'll send them to Sorsha.
For clarity, the title of this, that's page 43 is Vermont Military Retirement Income Tax Exemption, not veterans. Military retirement income.
Can I say something? I am getting letters from people saying, I'm so glad you're gonna be doing this because my father served, he has PTSD, he's disabled. Well, he is disabled, that might be different.
Right.
And then he thinks he's going to get a benefit, and I'm just, so we're gonna hear tomorrow about disabled. Okay.
I mean, I think one of the sort of challenging things about America in 2025 is that a lot of us are very disconnected from folks who serve. And so we get sloppy with our language and the lines between, what different types of discharge mean, what different types of service mean, and a retiree and a veteran and all of that, like that all is blurred because it's not as active a part of people's lives as it once was. And we don't have a base here. What else do we have in this? What else can you share with us? Yeah, sorry.
We have this memo. You
Yes.
sent it to us in
Um,
January.
Yeah, it should be on the committee's website and it actually, social posted for today as well.
Oh, okay, I need to. refresh.
So it'll be under my name.
Okay, thank you.
And again, I want to just like, I hope I opened up the door for this well enough when I started, like, we talked about this last a bajillion years ago, and like, please, no one feel embarrassed to not remember what we did before the education bill, like, my brain is, I've gone through a lot since then, yes.
Thank you for saying that, because I have that too. I've actually been sharing this memo with many of the people who write me, and almost all of them had figured out they would not qualify for the military retirement benefit. So that's just an interesting observation, but they figure it out. I don't, so I encourage you to think about that. It's very well written, so thank you for doing that. I still do have this confusion about how people who were wounded in the active duty are compensated, because they're eligible for a different kind of benefit. And I don't know how that benefit fits into this constellation of benefits. So if there is a way to get some clarification on that, that would be very helpful to me.
We have a lot of witnesses tomorrow who, from the Office of Veterans Affairs and, a few other folks, the Veterans Advisory Council, Adjutant General's Office, folks like that. But Pat, maybe if you could give whoever you would ask a heads up that we're gonna ask them these questions, that would be lovely, yeah.
The other piece, just quickly, that was in the governor's proposal, which you saw when you took up H-43 back in January, is it also would exempt survivor benefit income. And so generally, for folks who are in the military and enrolled in, they're receiving their pay, they're contributing into their pension system. What they can elect to do is sort of pay, it's kind of like a life insurance premium that they pay to set in the event of their passing, and the pension benefits going away. Their spouse, or in some cases their children, if they're eligible, can receive survivor benefits. I think generally it's capped out around 55% of what their pension benefit would have been. But Vermont does have quite a few survivors. As of 2022, there were 751 taxpayers in Vermont who were receiving military survivors benefits. And they received about $8.9 million total, which shakes out to about $12,000 on average that they're receiving these benefits. So what this proposal also proposes, in addition to exempting the military retirement benefits, is also exempting these survivor benefits from personal income taxes. So that's just it's a much smaller sliver of the overall sort of population and money picture, but they're also included in this proposal. And again, consensus with tax department, we're estimating that this would be about $3.9 million annually in, as a tax expenditure.
I know, just going back to CSRS versus FERS, just for giggles.
No one's gonna giggle about that.
Because I think CSRS, according to all the research that I've done in preparation for this bill and stuff, all says it's a contributory program. The employees have to contribute 7 to 8% of their pay.
CSRS, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And so-
Yeah, and I think that's
something different. Okay.
if I said the opposite was true, it's opposite there.
Okay, all right. All right.
I meant exactly what you're talking, and that's why Kirby has the language written like that to
Okay.
contributory.
That's what I thought. So these
Clarification, yeah.
all right. I was confused. Thank you.
And then there are other ways that we give tax credits to veterans in current law. that you-
There's a military pay exemption. I don't have the statute up in front of me, but it does allow for people who are currently serving to exempt some of their income that they receive as, their salary.
Please serve. Okay.
And I do think that Kirby has actually put together a little bit of research on this, just about areas of the tax code, when thinking about people who serve. You might have actually a little additional information you could share in a more organized way.
He has gone to the Senate and he'll be back. Do you want to share your third?
You can.
Do folks want to go deeper on this? Is this helpful? Is everyone's like, this is just review and I already know all of these things, or is? Okay. So let's, yeah. Thanks for rehashing old ground with us here today.
So the last document on the committee's website, under my name, is almost 50 slides that we've looked at together. So if there's areas you want to move ahead kind of quickly on or slow down on, just let me know. But this is, again, just sort of a little deeper dive into the mechanics of some of these tax proposals, along with a little more information about, who's claiming it and what how the dollar figures sort of shake out. So this was.
And I think it's really important when we think about tax credits, and we sort of talked about how different pieces overlap, to think about like sort of who in the population we're serving with them and how that's strengthening our overall tax structure.
So we've gone through this. This is just the what we saw in the fiscal note, and then what we just looked at in the fiscal memo that we were all looking at. But the combined change of all four of these tax changes would be about $13.5 million annually. The first being the child tax credit. As you all know, it's very recent. First year it was active was in 2022. And then again, so anyone with children under current law, anyone with children under the ages of ages 5 and under, who have AGI below $175,000 annually qualify for the CTC. It's a fully refundable credit. Claimants can receive $1,000 per eligible child if they have AGI below 125,000. Like I said, the cap is 175. So between 125 and 175, it's sort of that phase out range. So if you're smack dab in the middle at 150,000, you can get $500 per kid. And so, yeah, once you reach 175,000 in total AGI, you're no longer eligible. Doesn't matter what age your kid is. Federal law does provide a child tax credit up to $2,000 per child ages 16 and under. The amount of the credit depends on, again, the taxpayer's income. Their income thresholds are, totally different, but they do have them, and they are different than Vermont's. And so, last year, about 21,000 tax returns collected the CTC at a tax expenditure about $24 million. And interestingly, the most recent year was a little bit lower than what we received than what went out the door in 2022. So the very first year that the credit was live is about $25.1 million. So it's, the cost of the credit to the state has gone down by about $1 million over the course of the year. Again, we've talked about demographics, and Vermont has fewer and fewer children that could be contributing to that. One thing that's also, important to note about the structure of the credit is that the income bands or the thresholds don't adjust for inflation every year. So over time, as general population income does grow, fewer and fewer people would qualify for the full credit amount and then the partial. It's something that,
We did add an inflator to it. Do you have a sense of how fast it would grow?
Depends on inflation, right? In some years, it's going to be kicking it up more significantly than others, but I don't have a sort of guesstimate off the top of my head right at this moment.
I'd love for you to look into that.
Yeah.
Feeling like we should have added an inflator in the first. I have no memory of why we didn't at the time.
Can you tell me how that would work? An inflator?
Just that like the top threshold at 120. Pat, can you just talk about how an inflator would work?
Yeah, so there's plenty of precedent in, you know, current law in both directions on this. For example, with Vermont's tax brackets, those are increased with inflation each year. So each band in the income tax brackets, they go and they take the CPIU and just multiply them by that amount to grow them over time, because people's incomes are also growing. On the flip side, there's also plenty of precedent in the current tax code where certain income thresholds are sort of set and are static. The other one we're just talking about is actually the income thresholds for Social Security exemption. Those are set statute and require everyone here to go in and proactively make changes if they want to, you know, dial them up or down or what have you. You know, so one advantage that does is that it gives you a lot more control over the cost of certain tax expenditures. On the flip side, it can maybe sometimes be a little reactionary because it's not keeping up sort of in real time and takes, you know, sort of, like I said, proactive action to take that. But using this specific example, if you were to add a inflation adjuster to that 175,000, so every year, Commissioner Schuldeis goes Bureau of Labor Statistics website or what have you, pulls off what the inflation was in previous year, takes that, multiplies it by the existing threshold. And so let's say it was 10% is going to be easy brain math to do. Let's say it's 10%, so 175,000 is going to become 186,000, something like that. So it's just increasing it with the rate of inflation. So it's just a multiplication sort of exercise.
Later, okay.
Yeah.
So that would increase the amount that these people can earn each year and still get the benefit.
So that we're not in a position where in 30 years, hardly anyone's getting it because it's now a credit for like super low income people when it was designed to be for low income and middle income people.
I know the committee hasn't made a decision yet, but if we make that decision to include it, we should remember we're gonna do it later.
If we can afford it, we'll find out.
Yeah, that's another whole question.
People downstairs.
Who knows if we can afford anything, right? That's
Yeah.
a mystery. That's
Keep trucking. So yeah, like I mentioned, this proposal would just change the age eligibility from 5 to 6 years old for kids. And that's a $4.5 million foregone revenue annually. Take the total price tag of this credit up to about $28.5 million annually. And just to sort of give you a sense about the number of like what we're talking about here, when we went to estimate the changing cost, going from 5 to 6, it comes out to about an 18.5% increase in the number of age eligible children who live in households that are income eligible, right? So it's not, it's a 20% increase in sort of the age, but the number of kids that is, based on census information is a little bit lower. It's about 18.5. And so what I have next here.
Just on that question, but I was reading through and I want to make sure because we had somebody else come in here and say 7 and under or under 7. But it's the way I read it, and I probably should ask Kirby. So if your child turns 7 in that calendar year, you're not eligible for the tax credit. That's what I read it as saying. If your child has their 6th birthday in that calendar year and is not yet 7, then you are eligible for the credit.
That would be my understanding as well.
Okay.
But I mean, if you think about it, let's say this has always existed, not use the 2022 sort of cutoff, they would still have had 8 years within which they could claim it. Because in their first year, they could be born in December and they could be claimed as it's just, yeah, if that makes sense.
I know it does, yeah.
The next section I have here is from an issue brief that I wrote back in, I guess it was last year, actually. But it was looking at the sort of first year results of the child tax credit and sort of how that shook out. So, 21,000 tax returns, about 27,000 children claimed. If we're talking about moving that forward to now, it would just be 27,000 children increased by about 18% to give you a sense of how many age eligible children are, sort of being claimed by taxpayers who are eligible for this credit. In that year, like I mentioned, it was 25.1 million. So it came down a little bit to 24 million most recently. Some key findings from that issue brief that I shared was that most Vermont child tax credit claimants were from low and moderate income households. A lot of that is a factor of just the general Vermont income distribution. And also the fact that the income thresholds, going up to 175,000, that covers, so up to 125,000, sorry, that's about 79% of Vermont resident tax returns would fall into that income range. Going up to 175, that gets up to 89% of Vermont tax returns are income eligible for this credit. So it does cover the majority of, the vast majority of Vermont tax returns in terms of who can claim it. Moderate to higher income household child tax credit claimants were tended to claim more children on average. You'll see the numbers, or I don't know if I have them. I can share the issue brief as well. It's not a huge variation, but on average, it was slightly more common for higher income tax returns to be claiming more kids. Then married child tax credit claimants were more likely to be higher income, while single claimants were more likely to be lower income. I know that's not super revelatory. Married household has two potential sources of income as opposed to one. And then there's significant overlap between the CTC, the EITC, and the Child Independent Care Credit, with many filers claiming two of them or all three of them at once, just to give you sort of a sense of how a lot of taxpayers stack sort of the financial resources that are available to them through the tax code. This 92% was from 2022. The 89% I referenced is more recent, but for the sake of what's in the issue brief, about 300,000 Vermont taxpayers are income eligible for the CTC, although many of them don't have age eligible children. Those with lower income make up the majority of CTC claimants. Again, this probably isn't super revelatory because lower income households make up a much higher proportion of overall income distribution.
I also remember when we first developed the child tax credit, doing a lot of looking at just like income levels of parents of young children. And it tends to be like the lowest income level in someone's life. I certainly wasn't mine. I don't know the rest of you. Like, I certainly made less than when I was right out of college. It was, yeah.
So yeah, just again, looking at some of the income distribution here. So those between $0 and $75,000 of income, there's about 12,000 tax returns that report income within that range. And so that's about 5.6% of filers in that income range are claiming the credit. So it's single digits. It just is highlighting again that the people who have, of course, they're income eligible, but they have age eligible children that they can claim at a lower rate when you compare it to the 75 to 125,000 and the 125 to 175,000. You can actually see that as income goes up, the share of CTC claimants within that cohort also goes up. So just what this 10.2% is telling you is that of the 56,000 tax returns in Vermont that fall into that income range, 10% of those returns are claiming this credit. So really just what I'm trying to highlight here is that as income is going up, it's much more likely that those returns are going to have age eligible children that they can claim. And so again, looking at some of the income distribution of the credit recipients, what you're seeing here is somewhat similar to the last slide, but it's the share of income eligible filers and child tax credit claimants by AGI. So, and the color scheme here is terrible. I apologize, but the lowest income group, that's 0 to 75,000, those are in those black boxes there. So they make up about 73% of overall tax returns, but they make up about 60% of child tax credit claimants. So 75 to 125,000. Sort of the opposite relationship is true. They make up about 18% of total income tax returns, but they make up almost a third of child tax credit claimants. So just showing that, again, highlighting again that these higher income, relatively speaking, higher income tax returns are more likely to have those age eligible children and be able to claim this credit.
Oh, sorry, Pat, on that last one, just to make sure I'm understanding. It says share of total income eligible filers. So are all 73.1% in this reflected in this chart eligible for the CTC?
Yeah, so basically,
15% there that aren't claiming.
15%.
So, the difference between 58 and 73.
Well, these all should be adding up to 100% of their cohorts. So this is basically just taking all tax returns, regardless of whether they claim this or not. But only looking at the ones from $0, reporting $0 in income to 175, the one here on the right. So this is just looking at the income eligible cohort. And then this one on the right here is just looking at the credit claimant cohort.
Right.
So if I take the number of 0 to 75,000 claimants and divide that by the total number of claimants, that's how I'm getting to this 58.8.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Onwards.
Works. Claimants with lower income claim the CTC at lower rates than those with higher income. We talked about this. This indicates that lower income households are less likely to have age eligible children. However, there is potentially a cohort of households that either don't file their taxes or don't know that they are eligible for this. I think increasingly, as awareness of certain credits goes, makes the rounds in the general populace, people are likely to utilize it. I don't really see this as being a critical issue right now. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't people falling through the cracks, right? Like I mentioned earlier, there's certainly people who don't file taxes because they're not required to, because their income, they're making less than what the standard deduction would be anyway. So there's no incentive really for the tax department to say, hey, you have to file your taxes. One thing I remember Craig would always say, the whole Vermont tax system is built on the pillar of voluntary compliance.
Whenever anyone says that, someone always writes to me and it's like, does that mean I don't have to pay my taxes?
Well, it's an important statement, and compliance is an important piece of it too. It is still the law.
And we've talked about that a lot in the context of the homestead filing, because if that's the only.
So one thing I had mentioned there was sort of overlapping with credits. That's actually after this section. But what the earned income tax credit section here is, so this is just some quick history about it. One thing I want to call out is the statutory purpose. So it's sort of twofold. One is to offset the cost of traditionally regressive taxes for low-income Vermonters. Think like the gas tax, sales tax, something that makes up a higher proportion of lower income household budgets than someone who's higher income. So those are examples of traditionally progressive taxes. And then the other piece is to provide support to working households and families. sort of the implication there that it's meant to act as sort of a carrot to encourage people to work and provide them some support in doing so. First came about 1975, made permanent on the federal level in 1978. Vermont thought it was such a great idea that they just had that apply to Vermont tax returns and flow through starting in 1980. So right now it's at 38% of federal credit. When it was first implemented, it was 23% of the federal credit. The thing I always find interesting about the 23% is at the time that was what was referred to as the applicable percentage. Vermont used to just say, whatever your federal tax liability is, we'll just say 23% of that you have to pay to the state of Vermont for your Vermont taxes. So,
Pretty simple.
yeah.
Very easy.
But so when you get into the context, of federal changes and what does and doesn't flow through to Vermont, this would be a pretty good example of how the federal government would have 100% control over the state income tax statute. So there's certainly reasons to not have that system in place anymore. But I thought that was just kind of a interesting nugget. And so, like we mentioned,
When we first passed the EITC in 2022, it was the largest one in the country when we passed it.
What was the largest in the country?
Our new EITC was the largest or most generous of any state. DC's was higher. Not a state. And I'm wondering if you have any sense of sort of where this new move would put us in the.
not the highest anymore. I think maybe New Jersey might be higher now, or one of those other states. I have the list in another document that I could send to you, but still up there. But there's other states that are certainly higher than us now. I think I actually have a slide run with a couple, maybe. So yeah, last, like you mentioned, increase in 2022, part of that is 32%. So it's been changed a couple of times in the last, dozen or so years. But one thing to sort of highlight, again, this is sort of in the context of federal changes affecting the state of Vermont. In 2021, as a response to, a lot of stuff that was going on during COVID and sort of financial support that federal feds were giving to taxpayers, they actually took that single no dependent children claimant and jacked up what their maximum credit amount could be, and jacked up what the income thresholds that made them eligible was. And we'll look at some sort of highlighting charts that show how that worked out. But because we're just a straight percent of what the federal amount is, that change flowed straight through into Vermont, into the Vermont EITC and affected Vermont income tax revenue. Those were temporary, so you'll see in the chart after 2021, it kind of just goes back to status quo levels. Just to reiterate, proposals take those claimants without children, bump up their percent from 38% to 100%, $3 million in foregone revenue. Big percent change here, relatively small dollar amount change. And so part of that is, just how the credit is structured at the federal level to begin with. So there's sort of three primary criteria, and this is all sort of hopefully refresher stuff. So tell me to speed up if you want. There's three primary criteria to qualify for the federal EITC. You have to have earned income, meaning wages, salaries, tips. So earned income is one definition here. Another one is AGI, where you have to have AGI that falls within certain income ranges. So you have to have total income that falls within certain ranges, but you also have to have earned income, meaning you're working to qualify for the credit. And these are those thresholds. You can see here the zero dependent claimants have much more stringent income requirements than people who would just one one dependent. Just looking at this slide, this middle column here, going from 19 to 50, the one eligible dependent income threshold is more than double what someone without a dependent child would be able to qualify for. And the third piece is, as of 2025, you can't have investment income that's over $12,000. So sort of cutting out sort of maybe that cohort that could be working more, they're sort of relying on passive income, they could be doing more than they are. It's just, setting a cap on the amount of passive income someone can have and still qualify for this.
It's a weird number.
It's 11.9. So that is one that's pegged to inflation. So it one thing that happens, I mean, all these numbers in here seem like not round numbers. Everyone loves round numbers, but they increase with inflation every year. So yeah, you do end up with some numbers that just seem like where'd they get that from. Maximum credit amounts, again, vary based on the number of dependent children. Whereas here, you probably saw that the income thresholds vary based on filing status. This one is just the number of dependent children across all.
Representative Wozniak.
Do you have, I'm just curious, do you happen to know what inflator is used?
CPIU is what's used here. It's generally what I've seen by far the most common in tax statutes, both federally and at state levels. It's just, and I know Joyce is coming to talk to you about different inflation metrics before, but it's maybe one of my lesser favorite inflator metrics. The Federal Reserve uses a different one they call PCE, but this particular one is CPIU. It's the one that the IRS uses for, if not everything, almost everything.
Since our Ed Bill conversations, I've become very curious. Lack of uniformity among various inflating inflators.
And you saw this table here in the fiscal note that I shared, but this is just showing you, again, highlighting the fact that those claimants with 0 children, the maximum credit amount they can receive is much lower than a claimant who has, it's a big jump from going from 0 to 1. And even with the proposed change, this would still be less than, looks like about a third of what someone with one dependent child would be able to claim. So I'll kind of try and speed through this. Actually, you know what? Let's just go to the visual version of it because I think this is easier to digest. Basically, it's just showing, you have the credit amount, the maximum credit amount set by the feds based on number of children, and then the earned income amount here. This is really just showing that the credit phases in for this particular filing status. It's for every dollar you earn, you get 34 cents in credit value from it. Once you have hit the maximum credit amount, which in this case is about $4,300, there's a section of income where you sort of plateau and you can maintain your maximum credit amount over that stretch. It doesn't immediately start going down and phasing out. But then once you get to, again, the federally defined end of the plateau range, it starts phasing out. And for this particular filing status, it's about 16 cents per additional dollar earned. So when thinking back about the statutory purpose and whether incentivizing work, this range is sort of the range where it's like, okay, you've got incentive, like we want you to work more if you're able to, and reward that by giving you a larger credit amount. But then, once you get to a high enough income, sort of, this is all relatively speaking, once you get to a high enough income amount, we don't think you need the credit as much. So we'll just sort of gradually ease off the pedal there and sort of phase this out over a stretch of income. So looking at it by the numbers, this is not inflation adjusted here. So that would change sort of the overall trend line if we were to do that. But
How would that change the trend line if we were to do that?
it would bump the 2012 higher and sort of give it sort of like a downward sloping. Um, Reason being, probably manyfold, but one thing that comes to mind is incomes have been increasing quite a bit. This actually does cover sort of a whole business cycle coming out of the Great Recession. So those early years were definitely not as sort of rosy economic pictures in the job market. So even with inflation adjustment, it can still be kind of deceiving sometimes. Yeah, so just highlighting a couple of years, in 2018, EHTC was increased to 36%. In 21, there was that big change in the what single childless filers were eligible for
At the federal level.
at the federal level, which we'll see in a slide or two, which flowed directly through into Vermont. And you can actually see from 21 to 22, even with that temporary policy going away, or no, with the temporary policy going away, even with increasing the Vermont credit amount from 36 to 38, in nominal terms, 2022 was actually a lower overall credit value that went to taxpayers than 2020, which is just kind of, I thought was interesting. The total value of the Vermont EITC by year. So really what I'm highlighting here is that dollar amount, the dollar value that these claimants without children get is in the broader context. I think it shakes out to maybe about 5% year to year in the EITC is going to claimants without children. And again, you've got the big spike this year when the feds made those changes to temporarily expand the EITC for those single childless tax filers. And looking at it in a couple of other different ways, which I think are interesting. So when you looked at this one, sorry to jump back, that sliver in the dollar value for those claimants without children is really small. But when you compare it here, you can actually see that while the dollar amount is small, they make up about a third of total EITC claimants in a given year. And in 2021, with that temporary expansion, they made up over half of EITC claimants. So they're making up a very large cohort of EITC claimants, but they're actually pulling a very small amount of money from the credit. And I think that it's this sort of helps highlight maybe the fact that we're going from 38 to 100%, so big percentage increase there, but we're only increasing the overall cost of the program by $3 million because for all the reasons that we've been talking about. And maybe you'll remember this. This is the slide last time where I said, I'm trying to trick you. This is the average EITC from that sort of your average EITC claimant gets from year to year. Again, what's kind of interesting here, 2021.
Oh, I remember this moment now.
Yeah, 2021 was that federal change when they really amped it up. So big influx of low credit value receiving single people were getting it, which drove the overall value down. But sort of this is the big reveal. When we break out the average EITC by whether they have dependents or not, you can see that the difference is fairly remarkable. So, just in 2023, if you were claiming the EITC and you didn't have any kids, and we remember seeing those income thresholds, they're very low. You're only getting about $130 on average from this credit, whereas that cohort with dependents who have the much more generous income threshold requirements, we're taking about, in this case, it looks like 10 times the average credit value. So
If we pass the credit in 483, what will the bars look like?
43. The blues, well, this chart would still look the same because it's all historical, right? Sorry. It would still be it would still be a lot lower than the orange bars. If we just jump, sorry to go quickly, you can still see that on the Vermont side, these figures are just way lower than any other number of dependents. Um, This chart doesn't actually show anything all too interesting. If anything, it maybe highlights that the sort of income distribution doesn't really change a whole lot in this cohort of people. I mean, yeah, the share based on income has been relatively static in terms of the claimants over time. So this is what I have about other states. 31 states and DC offer the EITC. Structures vary, but by far the most common sort of setup is like Vermont's, with just setting at a flat percent of the federal amount. And then so DC, Maine, and Maryland are three examples that have a setup very similar to what's being proposed and contemplated here, where the claimants without kids can receive a larger percentage amount than those with. In DC, if you do have kids, it's 70%. If you don't, it's 100% of the federal credit amount. Maine, 12 and 25%. And Maryland, so Maryland is one that has a higher EITC than Vermont now. They're at 45 if you do have kids and 100% if you don't. And then, either North Carolina or South Carolina, I forget which one, they have a 125% EITC. Hidden in the details there, though, is it's non-refundable. So not actually as nice as you might think. There are two states that have sort of the opposite approach. Oregon and Wisconsin, they actually give a higher percentage amount to those filers with kids. So maybe that just highlights that there are some different approaches to what certain states think is important. But, you know, there certainly is precedent in the country for a structure similar to what's being contemplated here. Here is, I just wanted to sort of highlight some of that overlapping I was talking about. So this is looking at 2023 EITC and CTC data. You can see in Vermont, about 32,000 tax filers claim the EITC and 20,000 claim the CTC. Well, about 8,000 Vermonters claim both of these credits. So what that shakes out to is about a third of CTC filers also got the EITC, and about a quarter of EITC filers also got the CTC. So there's a very large, there's a very large degree of overlap between these two because, on the one hand, you're talking about the credit geared towards families with young children that are low and moderate income. And you've got another credit geared towards those lower income households that with the added incentive of they want them to be able to have the support so they can also be working and contributing to the labor market. And so that covers CTC and EITC. I still have a few slides on Social Security and then military retirement.
Yeah, just a quick question before you move forward. Is there any available research on the benefit of two separate taxes, whether as opposed to the transaction cost as opposed to just running one credit program with a larger refundable tax credit?
Well, I think what you might end up missing out on is some people. So like with the child tax credit, that can be available for households that, maybe one of the adults choose to stay home and provide the childcare instead of going to work. But that might not be a scenario that's applicable to someone who's eligible and receiving the EITC. So I guess just what I'm trying to highlight is certainly
Yeah, you would not be eligible for an EITC.
by having the two different credits sort of apply to different situations in life, you're have a less likelihood of missing someone that you would want to be receiving it.
And we can take some testimony from the tax department about transaction costs, but generally for a tax credit like this, they do not communicate a major lift on their part from them. A new tax type, whole other situation. Yes, that wound up costing significantly less than I thought it would, but still, it cost something. But yes, just sort of a new credit, new box, generally not a big transaction cost in testimony from them.
So social security, currently, if you're single, you have AGI of 50,000 below, or if you're married with AGI of 65,000 below, you can fully exempt 100% of your social security income. The contemplated proposal would increase by $5,000 these threshold amounts, so to 55 and 1,000 and 75,000. Again, there's that $10,000 sort of off ramp where you phase out the amount of the exemption. And yeah, so just this $5,000 bump out to these income thresholds would, result in an estimated $2.1 million in additional foregone revenue annually. Or maybe a different way to phrase this, increase in the cost of the tax expenditure. So it's relatively small change in income thresholds, but where we saw a huge change in the percent for the EITC resulting in a low number, this small 5,000 change, sort of looking at it in the context of how much it costs, I would say sort of has the opposite effect, just a $5,000 bump out costing $2.1 million. And this, just to be clear, that $2.1 million includes CSRS and military retirement in the cost of the estimate as well, including, all those pieces that we've talked about so far. So the next few slides, the next few slides are sort of meant to highlight and sort of show the order of operations of how Social Security income gets into Vermont tax returns in the first place, because there are some federal treatments of Social Security that people who receive Social Security benefit from on their state returns as well. So we have the state, those income thresholds we were just talking about that are sort of the state benefit, but there's federal definitions that flow directly through to us. So a portion of Social Security income is exempt from federal income already. If you're, if you're married and you earn less than $32,000 annually, none of your Social Security benefits are going to get taxed at the federal level. Between 32 and 44, up to 50%, and then greater than 44, 85% of your Social Security taxes income is going to be taxable. So that 15%, by the time you get to your Vermont tax return, has already been taken out of the equation. So right off the bat on your Vermont tax return, at minimum, a filer is going to be getting a 15% discount on that income when filing their state tax return. So 41 states, just looking nationally, 41 states and DC don't tax Social Security benefits at all. Important note there, 7 of those don't have any income tax whatsoever. And then there's 9 states, including Vermont, that offer a partial exemption on Social Security income. There is no state that fully taxes this income at the state level.
And in my experience, and unfortunately, I've never been able to look across all of our tax law in my time, we tend to add income thresholds to tax exemptions in order to sort of keep the overall construct in place rather than just exempting categories of income. Is that sort of consistent with what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, there's some that are just sort of not counted, like some municipal or federal bond interest that accrues, but
And there's some stuff that's illegal for us to tax, right?
railroad pension income.
Yes.
That's always the go-to example.
Yeah.
So anything that's, what's the word? Is it preempted by the feds? We can't tax. So it's a great point in that essentially this 15% is preempted. Hopefully Sherby wouldn't get annoyed with me by the phrasing of all that, but yeah. So the federal determination of Social Security of what part of Social Security benefits are taxable is they look at, they take half of your Social Security benefits and they add it to all of your other income to come up with your combined income. So the term combined income is important there because that table we were just looking at was combined income ranges in which you're eligible to exempt, not AGI, or we talked about earned income earlier. So right off the bat, just when determining what income threshold you have to meet in order to have eligibility to exempt some of this income on the federal level, they're already only starting by counting half of your social security income towards that amount. So yeah, you take the half the benefits, all of their income, it equals your combined income, and then runs through this table to give you what your taxable social security benefits are going to look like. So that's sort of the order of operations and how it flows. Once you have that endpoint, that taxable social security benefits, you add that to all the other things that you associate with being part of AGI, your salaries, tips, other pension income, annuities, and then the allowable deductions. And that's how we get to AGI. So the federally defined AGI already has a built-in exemption for Social Security income before you even start thinking about what Vermont allows you to exempt on your returns. And yeah, so this is really just describing current law here. Like we saw, your taxable Social Security benefits, you run through the different income thresholds we have to determine how much you can or can't exempt. Currently, Vermonters pay about, or the current exemptions save Vermonters about $8.2 million on their Social Security benefits annually. That's current law. And then on the flip side, our office estimates that Vermonters pay about $60 million in taxes on Social Security income. So that non-exemptable amount, we estimate that folks pay about $60 million to the state in revenue.
And those are folks with other income.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I think at most in 2025, if you have maxed out every possible part of the formula, you can get maybe about $60,000 from Social Security in a given year. And so that would be that's the people we're talking about are over and above. They're going to have maybe military retirement income, or, IRA, 401k, all those sort of other distributions, brokerage, dividends, selling a business, a lot of that kind of stuff. So yeah, these are going to be people with other streams of income in addition. Yeah, so this is in that about $60 million that I said people pay in Social Security taxes. This is sort of what that shakes out to be by income. You can see these people all the way towards the bottom are really not paying much, or they're not paying anything on it because they fall within those income ranges that allows them to fully exempt that income type. But on average, about $700 in taxes on Social Security income across the state. And of course, that would go up a little bit if we were to remove these below $50,000 returns from this overall sample. Okay. So that was Social Security. The last section here is just military retirement and survivors benefits. I have to admit, I think I stole everything in this section of the PowerPoint from the memo that we were looking at earlier, but we can look at it again briefly. Additional cost about 3.9 million annually. And I guess just talking about the population, the number of retarees in Vermont has been pretty stable for a very long time. If you look at it,
Military retirees.
yeah, their total population, the number of them receiving benefits a given year goes up by 5 people, 10 people, 7 people, 11. It's growing, but razor thin amount, really low growth rate. So I guess when just thinking about, it's always good to think, is this something that could increase over time or decrease over time? It seems like it's fairly stable. The population hasn't been growing or shrinking really.
When you've run numbers on the full exemption, did you anticipate that the population would grow for that?
See, that's difficult. When we're talking about the incentive at play here, it comes out to like maybe $900 on average tax savings. which in my mind, I wonder if that is gonna cause like a gold rush to the state, you know? It's not a hugely significant sort of incentive to get someone to get up and move. Although, you know, what we would probably need to do is look at, we'd have to figure out when certain states fully exempted this income, go back and sort of see how their population might have changed, compared that to maybe some control states. It's possible. It's not something I would expect, like a big jump in this population.
So we could hear tomorrow, I think it was tomorrow, I saw that the military people are gonna be coming in here to explain that. I know just today, I heard that when these young people get out of the military after 20 years service, that they are advised to go to certain states that already have this military exemption for their income, and Vermont isn't on that list. So if we change this, Vermont will be on the list. And of course, people like the general have been telling us for years now that if we change this, there will be an inflow of people who want to come to Vermont, but who don't because they can save money living in Kentucky or some other place. So we just have to see.
We'd be on the list along with, what, 40 other states? And I love it here, but I don't know if,
I don't know how many
Yeah.
other states are. We can maybe see
yeah, that's a
tomorrow.
good thing to find out. Yes, Representative Nestor.
Yes, thank you. There's a bunch of stuff in past years having to do with this. Ways and means looked at. Specific with regards to how many people might move here. And what we've heard in the past is in many cases, people will move to where their grandchildren are. Or near Fort Bragg, or near this, or near that, where there's well-established everything for veterans, you know, stuff like that. And one study that we looked at a number of years ago said, yes, there'll be an income increase, but it'll be awfully slow. Because other states have other benefits, you know, it's hard to outcompete North Carolina, you know, or Virginia, or this place or that place. And so I don't doubt that we'll see an increase in inflow. But I doubt that it's gonna be anything that's gonna jump overnight. And I'm not criticizing get more veterans to or stay here. I think that's all fine. But I think our expectation might very well be mutated. So we say, and that's not the right word. Shouldn't get out over our keys.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yes.
so there's, if you go back through years and ways and means, there's a bunch of stuff out there for us to look at. One study in my last thing said that it'll cost us money. And we'll basically break even. But it'll take 10 years. That was a number of years ago, so the numbers,
Was that a Graham memo?
it may have been a grand number, yeah. But anyway, there's a lot, if people want to bone up on this stuff, there's a whole lot to read.
You left out the folks that might stay because their family is here.
Well,
That would be for the benefit.
that's true. You're correct. Representative.
Go back to Pat.
Sure. Quite close. You know, we talked about this just in terms of talking about the population of individuals we're talking about. Have to distinguish between veterans and retirees. They're two very different cohorts, and the number of in these two populations is very different. You know, we're talking 34,000 versus about 3,900. And so, and again, of the 3,900, only about 3,600 are actually actively receiving benefits. Presumably, it's those people who are retired as reservists who have to wait until they're 60 to actually start collecting the pension. And this is just showing you a little bit about how sort of what average military benefits look like. So statewide, they've got about $91 million in military pension income, those 3,600 retirees. So on average, Vermont military retirees are getting about $25,000 in this type of income. Which, when you compare that to the US as a whole, it's lower. It's 31,000 on average in the US, but in Vermont, it's about 25,000. But even within that cohort, there's a big distinction between pension income for people who retired as officers versus enlisted. So if you just look down here, officers on average are getting about $43,000 in pension income in Vermont. Whereas those enlisted folks, it's a hair under 20,000 that they receive in total in annual pension benefits. And yeah, just looking.
You can hang up. Oh, good. Sorry, I thought you were about to change slides and I was like, wait, no, don't move it yet.
Yeah, so officers, while they get more on average from it, they make about a quarter of the retirees, whereas the enlisted folks are about 74%. So, there's 3 times as many as enlisted folks. They get less from this income type. So, more of them will receive it, but they'll make up a relatively smaller portion of the number of people who receive the tax benefits from fully exempting it. So, I mean, if your effective tax rate's 4% on 42,000, I don't really want to do public math, but that tax benefit would be much higher for those, people receiving 42,000 or 43,000, this income type would be fully exempted compared to the more numerous enlisted folks who just have less of this income to be able to exempt.
For the enlisted folks that are at an average of 19,000, do you have a sense of what percentage of those folks are coming in under the threshold in current law?
I wish I could find out.
No, because you can't.
Yeah,
income data.
That if I could figure that out, it would make my estimating life so much easier on so many fronts.
Can't because that quickly, but can you just repeat?
So, yeah, a question came up earlier about veteran income and retiree income. And so we can get good information on what veteran households income looks like because it's something that the Census Bureau includes in some of their surveys. So they have figures that we can rely on. When we talk about retirees, I can get really good data on what their pension income is, but they're not sort of tracked as a cohort like veterans are by any of the federal sort of databases I've been able to find. So it's just really difficult to know what their overall household income looks like, because certainly there's going to be a large cohort who are retired, so they're military retiree and they're not working. But a lot of them do retire between the ages of 40 and 50, and presumably are going to go and get another job in addition to the pension income they're receiving. So it's hard to suss out.
But it would also be difficult to figure out how many of these people that receive the 18,000 already benefit from the current system in which the first 10,000 is exempt, if their income is low enough.
Yeah, I mean,
you can't calculate that.
if they're not at an age where they're receiving Social Security yet, but they are receiving their pension, those are probably most likely going to be the individuals who are benefiting from the current system where you have to choose one or the other. So yeah, if you don't have the Social Security income, but you have this, there's no choice to be made, right?
Right, but they might also have other income
Sure,
as
yeah,
well.
exactly, yeah.
And you still have to stay
Absolutely.
within that threshold.
Oh, sorry, I understand.
Right.
Yes, yeah, that's based on AGI. It encompasses all of your income, not just
Right. Okay, but say 18,000 was part of their AGI.
Yeah.
If their AGI fit under that threshold, they would be able to deduct part of this 18,000.
Up to 10,000 under current law, yeah.
Up to 10,000 of this 18.
Mhm.
But if their total AGI was higher, they would not be able to
That's
deduct any of this 18.
A stupid question. At what point are there limitations on whether or not they can receive their full retirement benefits if they're actively working?
My understanding is no. Once you retire from active duty service, you're, this is on like army.com, or army.gov, sorry.
Oh, good. Don't worry about your research skills.
Army.gov.
General insurance company.
They have their own HR pages and everything.
Yeah.
But it lists on there, after 20 years of service, if you retire as an active duty military, you're eligible to start receiving your benefits right away. It's just those reservists, people who retire as a reservist, that they have to wait to the age 60.
Yeah, so even if you're 60 though, you're still gonna receive your benefits, even if you go get a job, you're earning a ton of money, you're getting your retirement benefits.
You can receive this income and also work.
Okay, great, thank you.
And yeah, just to mention again, military retirees are not the only group of people that are affected by this proposed change. It also exempts survivors benefits. There's 750 of them in Vermont. They receive about 8.9 million, or about 12,000 on average. And so that their income would also be exempted under this proposal. Much smaller sliver, but again, they are included, and there's about 750 of them. This is treading familiar ground, estimated $3.9 million. The overall summary of these 4 different proposals is the 13.5 million in foregone revenue annually. And yeah, those are the 4 pieces we talked about. And I'm happy to take any other questions if there are any.
I see none, even though you were not yet on the question slide. So let me see again.
I must have been crystal clear.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. We are done for the day.
Well,
Tomorrow we are gonna start our day with a charter change from Swanton. We will vote on the charter change from Swanton. So if you have any concerns about Swanton, please try to address them before 9:05 tomorrow. And then we're gonna hear from folks related to pension tax credits. Pretty much all day